example. But it was intriguing how the local communities were running themselves in an effective way, and this, as I took it, was through committees and through these structures under the 1945 legislation. Before I came to this inquiry, I was unaware of that legislation. It was an eye-opener to me. It seemed that Dr. Ranginui Walker was more than well aware of the legislation through some of the comments I think he made, and probably made that week. But I mention this because the missing part to my written submission is the involvement of Ngāpuhi through their own forms of local self-government.
Mr. Irwin, further to that, isn't it a shame, don't you think, that they didn't get more support and consistent support and durable support from the Crown to foster that self-government and rangatiratanga on the ground?
I think one of the things that has been intriguing, if we join issue 1 and issue 9 together, there have been the numerous structures that the Crown has provided and that Ngāpuhi and Northland Māori more generally have used over time. The county councils, by and large, now they've changed over time for various reasons. So to a much lesser extent have other forms of local government. So we have provinces, they're abolished in 1876 and a new form comes in the county councils. But that form of local government survives, it appears. We have currently the Local Government Act, I think, of 2002. We don't have county councils anymore, we have district and regional councils, but they've inherited their predecessors. That form of local government, the facts would show, has survived, whereas those forms of, those structures that the Crown's provided for Māori forms of local government have not. I have to accept the fact of that. It's interesting, isn't it? The district runanga of the 1860s, their jurisdiction is in respect of customary Māori land at a time in this inquiry district where there is still a lot of customary Māori land, particularly in the Hokianga region and elsewhere too. And of course, it appears those structures come to an end. And it's about that time, isn't it? We have the we have 1876 and we have county councils. And in the Hokianga, Māori flock to it and do well in the Hokianga. Apparently not so elsewhere. 1883, we have this complex puzzle with the Native Committees Act and other structures provided by the government. And there is some appetite for it, there really is. And I think in one of the submissions we've detailed that, because it wasn't a complete failure, certainly. It was attended to by Northland Māori. But again, the facts are those formal structures don't survive. Possibly informal structures do, that Northland Māori take on themselves. Come the 1900s, we have that legislation, of course, and the councils of that period have a difficult time. They have the First World War, they have a depression, and that's important context, because the decline of the first Māori councils, I thought was really tied partly to that period of time of the First World War. They revived afterwards, and so there is support certainly. The Māori war effort occurs, and we have the structures that follow, new structures, similar, quite similar. In fact, it'd be fair to say that the progression of structures that the Crown has provided, when you do look at them seamlessly, as we've set them out in the Issue 1 submission, the changes could be seen to be comparable, I guess, in a way to the changes in other forms of local government. Provincial government is replaced by county councils. Over time there are various changes, and then we have the current day structures. As I say, they inherit the predecessor county councils. The county councils are amalgamated into what become the new councils. It's not a complete shift. It's an aspect of government to provide forms of local government. Your question is, isn't it a shame that there hadn't been more support?
Well, more support, but also that structures are created and then in some cases they are undermined by other structures that are created. And I mean, the obvious one is the new institutions versus the Native Land Court. And so things are offered and then they're kind of taken away.
Well, can I just talk to you about the relationship between the Runanga and the Native Land Court? Because I find that intriguing. Because the district Runanga had as broad... If there was ever a time where the government formally recognised a form of self-government for Māori, it was then.
Yes.
And it was as broad as possible. They had, the Runanga had a very broad criminal jurisdiction, and also a very broad civil jurisdiction. And I think I made the point the other day that just because we don't see the promulgation of more than one formal bylaw, it doesn't mean at all that they weren't busy doing the job of self-government. And you have the Native Land Court that is determining title, which my learned friend's taken you through. And Māori are clearly involved in that process too, involved in not only the determination of the lists of owners, and that seemed quite clear, but also taking the role as an assessor in that court. And so I didn't see that those two institutions, the Runanga and the Native Land Court, were so incompatible, or if you like.
Well, I think that is quite debatable. I mean, the Runanga, the new institutions, there was a system of election to those Runanga. They were completely Māori controlled with quite extensive powers of determination, as you say, on a wide range of issues, and including it was initially suggested that they would be able to control the pace of European settlement. And the Native Land Court really doesn't compare in that way. As you say, I mean, essentially, where Māori have power, any sort of power, is outside the court, but within a framework that actually ends up undermining their capacity for communal control. Because once you start individualising title, as the Crown have conceded, it's actually very, very hard to prevent fragmentation and alienation of land.
I absolutely agree with that last part of what you said, and with much of what you said too. But one thing that did intrigue me, I referred to this just before, but in my issue 1 submission 3.3.402 at page 102, just looking at the quote of the jurisdiction of the powers claimed by the village Runanga, in the middle of the list is selling land, when, at what rate. Now, I accept it's not determining title to land, and strictly speaking, the jurisdiction of the Runanga is tied to Māori customary land, land for which native title has not been adjudicated. But isn't it intriguing that in parallel, if you like, Māori are participating through the court in determining title in the way that I described it. And I entirely accept the issue of the individualisation of title, which is a core problem. But at the same time, at least this Runanga is corralling the troops. It's asserting that it will decide when land is sold and at what rate. So, interesting.
Well, I think that's actually one of the points I was trying to make, that actually the Runanga had quite considerable powers to control the system. And when you look at what the government was really prepared to fund consistently, I mean, this was one of the complaints that was made at the 1891 Rees-Carroll Commission, that the Crown was prepared to fund court judges in the court, and that it was actually quite an expensive way of doing things. But when it came to funding Runanga, that support from the Crown wasn't there.
I have to accept that.
All right. Okay, well, thank you.
And similarly, just to finish that off, you get to the Māori councils at the same time that the county councils are there. There's this small provision in the Māori council legislation for raising a rate or a tax, but it's very limited. It doesn't really extend to Māori beyond the fringes of the kāinga. And so 20 years later, there are still Northland Māori opposing the 1924 Rating Act and saying that we need Māori councils which can actually get the rates that we pay away from the county councils and spend them for our own people. So that's a consistent line of thought from 1900 right through till 1920s, but run by the people sitting on the Māori councils, whose fortunes went up and down like this and who finally faded away. And it's at that overlap point between the institutions, basically of Pākehā society, the county councils, the borough councils, who have this power in terms, they're much better set up to fund infrastructure and to collect rates. And that's where the lack of support for Māori being able to do the same thing happens. I think that's where you become very conscious it's not there.
And actually, could I just ask Dr. Parsonson, your reference to the period of 1924 and the complaint to paying rates at that point, is that from Northland Māori?
Yes, I believe so. That's from Stirling.
Because Mr. Stirling's evidence is also that, by and large, county councils were just unable to collect rates from Northland Māori, and I take it that he's generalising. It must have happened from time to time, but his overriding point or impression was that by and large in Northland, the counties were unable to collect their rates throughout the 19th century when they were able to, through, he said, to the 1960s.
Yes,
and you get into the issues as to how it's reinforced by the mechanisms that the county councils try to use to get some form of rate in respect of Māori land, which tends to reinforce that they weren't getting much in the way of rates from Māori land.
No, they weren't, because on the whole people couldn't afford to pay them. But nevertheless, there's that wish to raise, to remove that burden that the county councils represented, and for Māori perhaps thinking they'd be able to deal with this much better themselves. I mean, the phrase used is, and then we can have a council of Māori who know the circumstances of its people. And that's really what the point was, that probably it would work much better.
And I think that segues back into the issue of rates. I suggest we come back to the issue of rates, and back to my issue 9, submission 3.3.413 to page 7. And just while we're going there, the timetable has this issue going over till tomorrow, so we'll go till just before 5, and then we'll finish for the night. So I've tried to look at this in terms of periods of time, and I think my learned friends for the claimants have helpfully done the same thing. In the first period, 1842-1876, Māori land is not rated. And we've already had we've had a limited discussion around, we've actually had a discussion about the period of time after this, but just getting back into the issue 1 issues, during this period of time, the Crown by and large is just keeping out of Northland. The Crown submits that Ngā Puhi are still certainly in control of their own communities at this point in time. Tikanga is being applied, Māori law is being applied by Māori during this period of time. At least, I guess this period goes up to 1876, at least up until the period that we were talking about, which was the district runanga. And then I say through the district runanga, even more so. And I do note at paragraph 24 that provinces lacked any power to make laws affecting Māori customary lands at this time. At paragraph 27, the claimants do not seem to take issue with this period of time in terms of the issue of rating. They submit that the establishment of the Auckland province did not have any immediate impact on the power and mana of Northland Māori, with the sparse settlement in the north, and say the position of Northland Māori went unchanged. I'll go to the next period, 1876 to 1882, 2 enactments, the Counties Act of 1876 and the Rating Act of 1876 occur at that point. The provinces are abolished. And by this time, it appears to be the case that the runanga are no longer apparently active. My paragraph 30, eligibility to vote in county council elections was premised on having rateable property. Māori were not restricted from voting or being elected so long as they met the property holding requirements. Essentially all people, both men and women, of 21 years of age who owned property or a minor's right could vote and be elected. I assume the issue of minors' rights is not an issue in Northland, more so for the Coromandel, no doubt, and Otago. But at paragraph 31, as I mentioned earlier, the first Hokianga County Council, as elected in 1876, was dominated by Māori. I won't go through that quote, but turning the page, my paragraph 32, while Mr Sterling did not analyse the results of all Hokianga County Council elections to determine exact numbers of Māori representatives, we do know that in November 1878, more Māori were elected to the Hokianga County Council, and in 1881, certain Māori councillors were re-elected in what appeared to be the third election of that county council. And it's intriguing, of course. It doesn't stay like that, and I've already accepted that. When I say that, I mean whilst Mr Sterling at least didn't carry on looking at further results, I think it's fair to say, through the evidence we've had and through the further evidence that the Tribunal commissioned, that the level of Māori being elected to these bodies drops off in county councils.
Sorry, Mr. Urban.
But can I just make one point? And that is that these first examples show that Māori can participate not only in voting, but in being elected, possibly more importantly, or just as importantly. The requirement to be elected was the same. You had to own rateable property. And so it shows that it could happen under the structure, which leads me to say it isn't actually quite clear why it drops off. I don't know. I don't know what occurs in the mid-1880s in Hokianga, for example, where Māori population relative to non-Māori, the Māori population relative to the non-Māori population is relatively high compared to other districts, say in Whangarei, where Māori are well outnumbered by that time.
But your quote on the previous page sheds some light on it, because it talks about the first county council being dominated by Māori councillors, added much to the disgust of many settlers.
Yeah.
So clearly people were not feeling very welcome.
Well, and yet despite that, the very next election...
Yeah, they still stand.
They still stand.
They keep going for 3 elections and then they go.
Yes, but I don't know quite how much I would put in that quote and the reference to the disgust as being the reason. I mean, you know, just to be more sort of forensic about it, you know, even if we assume there's some disgust amongst the Pākehā population at this time to Māori being elected to a county council, what actually happens? Do they rally together to try and outvote Māori? Do Māori stand for election? Which is something that could actually have been researched, because there would be records.
Yeah,
you can even look at the newspaper records following the county council elections throughout the country were all at the same period of time, and you can actually go to newspapers and you can find, and they're pretty much the same time of the year as well, and they're all online too, and you can see the results, and that's intriguing because one could actually try to determine are Māori actually standing for election or not. So I don't know. Even if there was disgust, it's difficult to know quite why it was that that a change occurred. But a change occurred. There's no doubt about that. Now, where was I? Turning though to the issue of rates, my paragraph 33, under the Act of 1876, Māori land that was occupied by Māori was not rateable property. And this meant the only kind of Māori land that was rateable was Māori land occupied by Europeans who paid the rates. Coming down to my next paragraph, there's an interesting record of Mr. Stirling's, who refers to a hui at Kawakawa chaired by Wiremu Kātene, the member for Northern Māori at the time. It was attended by Māori representatives from all over Northland. Mr. Stirling says those at the hui eventually agreed to accept the provisions of the Rating Act 1876, provided that certain amendments were made. And I thought I'd actually, because it begs the question, well, what were the amendments and were they made? So I've just gone back to Mr. Stirling's evidence, which is A15 at page 122. I'm not sure if I don't know that it necessarily needs to be put on the screen, but that's the that was the source for my quote there. Mr. Stirling says a change was sought. So these are the amendments that he's talking about. A key change sought was that where land was multiply held, each grantee should be rated according to the proportion of their interest in the land. This would, of course, require an agreement amongst the owners as to their interests, or a native land court determination as to their relative interests. This may not have been what those at the hui sought. Rather than painstakingly ascertaining each grantee's share, they simply sought to avoid the situation that was obviously then affecting them. That is, rates demands were sent to just one of the grantees. Usually he deemed to be the rangatira, or, quote, leading man, unquote. And so the issue there is that that Māori are seeking a change to the law. And bear in mind, the law at this time is that Māori land occupied by Māori is not rateable. It's only if it's occupied by Europeans that it is rateable. And it's difficult to understand quite what understanding and what correct understanding Māori had at this hui of the law relating to rating. I mean, they've got a concern clearly, and Mr. Stirling says the concern is that they are getting rates demands, he says. They're being sent to one of the grantees as opposed to others, as opposed to other owners. But if I can just carry on, because the claimant, I'm back into my paragraph 34, the claimant's generic submissions also note this hui and the petition that followed. The petition that followed requested a number of matters, including that land over which native title had not been extinguished be exempt from rates, which is odd, as I go on to say, because if that's what they wanted, they already had it. And so it actually tends to suggest that the understanding as to the law relating to rates wasn't quite clear. Just sticking in my submission, going over the page, the claimants submit that the response to this petition was, quote, completely unsatisfactory, end quote. In terms, however, of the critical issue that customary land be exempt from rates, this issue went to the Native Affairs Committee, and Mr Sterling records that there was nothing for the committee to do. As I say, customary land was already exempt from rates.
And I don't think that's surprising at all. I mean, this is a brand new system. And not only, and the hui is held in 1877, so that's the year after this new system comes into practice. So, clearly Weramu Kātani is trying, to ensure that people know how it might work. And then we have this constant succession of changes in the law subsequently, which is always difficult for people to cope with. And as it was with the native lands legislation.
Yes, I agree with the difficulties in keeping track of all the changes with the native land legislation. My focus here, and we'll carry on with this tomorrow, has been to look at, well, as I think my learned friends for the claimants have done, is when is Māori land rateable in fact? And also what I've tried to do is look at, well, have rates actually being paid? Are Māori paying rates? And so I've tried to look at that through the evidence. So I mean, I don't think there's much in it, but on this one issue, and there's no criticism that Māori of the time didn't quite understand the law relating to rating. No doubt many settlers didn't either.
Well, Mr. Irwin, we'll probably a good point to leave it there
I think
for the
so.
evening. Any matters of timetable or anything like that?
No.
No. Council, any matters? No. Owen, mā wai tā tātou karaki e taki. He, nana.
A tēnā rā kura Ngāti, Rahiri, ko mai tēnei honore kia Ngāti rangi anu. Reira tīmata mai tēnei hui hui roto te karakia, koe tēnei kākamutu ngai roto te karakia. Reira krori ki tō tātou kaihanga i ngā wāhi, ngā wā katoa. Krori a kia koe e pā nāu rā cheki manaki ngia. Te whānau te iwi e kororo nei tēnei rā, wa ngā whanua e pāna ki a tātou tūpuna. Te aroha hoki, horakau o tātou tūpuna kei kone ingari ngā reo. Ko rātou i ki aike no homa i roto tēnei au, i roto au te aroa. Engari haere tunu ana ngā tuituhinga, i roto hoki, ngā kororo hoki o tēnei huihuinga ke kite ei, te pono, te tika hoki, o ngā kororo whariki tia. Nere ka kore rā, he mute te whakawheta e whakamuimiti kia koe. I te mohio kia koe, ko mohio te tika te pono. I te kore mohio kia koe, ko kore ke mohio te tika te pono. Ko he hoki o tātou noho. Ko e tēnei ka inu i tonu ki kia koe e te atua ka harawa. Ka noho mei te waira roto i a tātou ka kai kororo. Ka noho i te pono i roto i a tātou, i roto au te aroa. Ngā pakanga hoki o mua, ngō tātou tūpuna. Ka hatia iwi katoa hoki nau e pā. Engari haere tūna ana ngā kororo rātou, ngā tuhituhi. Aroha mai, kia kite ei te pono, te tika, kia noho tahi tātou, Pākehā, Māori, te iwi katoa te ao. Koe hoki te timatanga hoki ngā mahi katoa. Māuna haka tika inge tēnei mō tātou. Kia noho e o tātou tamariki o tātou mokapuna. Ka hatia no hea te iwi. Kia noho tahi ei te whakapono kia koe. I runga tīnga tapu, te ngā te kai whakaora i Ukraiti. Āmene. manaki e te whāne hokene o rātou wā kāinga, checking e rātou i te moe, ka rā te ata, maramana ngā whakaaro. No reira kia tau anō, kia tātou katoa. Te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a ihu kreiti. Me te āraha o te atua, me te whiringa tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, 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 amen. Kia ora mai tātou.
See you all tomorrow, same time, same place. Thank you.
Can I have some of your yellow stickers?
Yes, I've got books full of them.